Thanks for joining us on The World Today, the last edition for this week. I'm Jokia Rogers. Here's what's coming up. Iran and Hezbollah condemn USUK airstrikes on Houthi rebels. Peru strengthens security after state of emergency declared at border with Ecuador following series of violence. And severe flooding hits Argentina. Welcome again to the program. US and UK forces have struck more than 60 targets at 16 locations used by the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The US Air Force, which reported the incident, clarifies some targets as command and control nodes, munitions depots, launching systems, production facilities, and air defense radar systems. More than 100 precision-guided munitions were used in the overnight strikes that left 5 people killed and 6 others injured. U.S. Air Force Central Commander Lieutenant General Alex Grinvich says these strikes were to defend against Iranian-backed militia groups, including Houthi militants, and the threats they pose to regional security and stability. Stating his report, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed that the Royal Air Force participated in the attacks. He added that non-operational support came from the Netherlands, Canada and Bahrain to degrade Houthi military capabilities and protect global shipping. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry has condemned the strikes on Yemen as a clear violation of Yemen's sovereignty, territorial integrity and a violation of international laws. The ministry's spokesman, Nasser Kanani, said in a post which partly reads, "The attacks will have no results other than fueling insecurity and instability in the region." The Iran-backed Lebanese armed group Hezbollah also condemns the strikes on Yemen, saying the American aggression confirms once again that the U.S. is a full partner in the tragedies and massacres committed by the Zionist enemy in Gaza and the region. But according to the Pentagon, the strikes, which were led and coordinated by the U.S., were intended to disrupt and degrade the Houthis' military capabilities, specifically drone and missile sites, which they've been using in Yemen to target international shipping in the Red Sea. Let's get more on this. The VOA's national security correspondent, Jeff Selden, joins us now. Hi, Jeff. Great to see you today.
Glad to be here.
Right. So what more do we know regarding this, the airstrikes on the Houthi rebels by the UK and the US?
Well, the airstrikes was a wave, and a very heavy wave of airstrikes launched by sea, by air, and even by some submarines. According to the U.S. military, there were more than 100 precision-guided munitions that were dropped on Houthi targets. They said they targeted some 60 Houthi targets at about 16 locations across Yemen. And the initial assessment, the White House says that they're still reviewing the airstrikes and what type of progress, what type of impact they made. But the initial assessment as of hours after the strikes were carried out is that the strikes did significant damage to Houthi capabilities. They targeted radar installations used to target shipping in the Red Sea. They targeted areas where the Houthis stored and launched their cruise missiles, their ballistic missiles, and their drones, which have been used on the attacks on shipping. And so the U.S. is expressing some confidence that, at the very least, Houthi capabilities have been significantly degraded. However, U.S. officials and military officials are also saying that they expect that the Houthis will try to mount some sort of response, and they may try to renew some attacks at some point on shipping in the Red Sea, or even find other ways to try to hit U.S., British, and other Western targets. And the warning there is, if they try that, there could be more strikes on the way.
Right. Iran, which backs the Houthis, said that the strikes were a clear violation of Yemen's territorial integrity. What could be the greater implication of this, even as Houthis vow the strikes on their positions will not go without punishment or retaliation?
Well, the concern for U.S. officials, for British officials, for Western officials has been the threat of escalation. How one of these events, whether it's airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen or the situation, the conflict between Gaza between Hamas and Israeli forces, the threat of the Iranian-backed Hamas trying to somehow expand that conflict, or Iranian-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon expanding the conflict. That's what's been the biggest concern. Some former officials tell us, so they think in this case, because of the way the U.S. and Britain carried out the strikes, that they think there may be some response from the Houthis. But at this point, as devastating as the strikes may have been, and again, U.S. officials saying initially they think that it was significant, the damage that was done, Iran, while it may talk, it is not yet in a position where it's going to feel the need for itself to respond to U.S. strikes. And so they think that the escalation, the risk that this conflict will spread even further, will be limited. And of course, the hope is that by striking these targets, by taking out these Houthi capabilities, that shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, that the attacks on those ships, the need to divert ships from those regions, which are causing cascading implications for economies around the world, that will be limited, in that this will be a net benefit to the West.
Oh, so how does, the fears that, or the warning that Iran is warning, the U.S. and its other allies that are, helping to take out these Houthi positions, they fear that it's a bigger implication for the region, as I've just mentioned. How bad is it? How much of a fear should we entertain in that this might just be, a war that we don't need?
Intelligence and military officials who I've spoken with consistently say, look, there are two things you see. First, you see a lot of the talk, what different nations, what different officials, what different groups are saying. And they say, you can listen to the talk, watch the talk, be aware of the talk, but the more important thing to be careful of and to be mindful of is the actions. Is that talk, is that saber rattling in some cases, backed up by actions? And that's kind of where the U.S. and Britain are right now, waiting to see what the actual response. There's been a lot of words, there's been a lot of threats, there's been a lot of saber rattling, but how are the Houthis in reality going to try to strike back? How is Iran and its proxies, how are they going to take in the situation, and what operations may they launch? How are they going to try to apply pressure on the West? And so until that happens, until the talk is backed up by action, U.S. security officials for now are being cautious and trying not to be overly concerned, not to be overly anxious about what could happen. And again, the gamble here is, the thought is here that the way these strikes were carried out, it will degrade the Houthis' capabilities. The Houthis may try to respond a little bit, but U.S. officials are fairly confident for the moment that this will not escalate or cascade into a bigger conflict.
Right. How justifiable are these attacks? Because the Houthis are saying that, it's trying to retaliate for Israeli attacks, in the Gaza. Clearly, its support for Hamas is outlined in this. But, there are no Israelis on the Red Seas. There are certainly no Israeli, most of the load on the ships are for people elsewhere around the world. So how can it justify its attacks on, global shipping companies and, people's stuff that are getting destroyed?
Well, to your point, U.S. officials who spoke just after the airstrikes were carried out absolutely, completely rejected the Houthis' contention that there's any connection between what they are doing and trying to show any type of support for the people of Gaza. What U.S. officials say is that what the Houthis are doing is part of a bigger plan, a bigger effort by Iran to apply pressure to the region, to apply pressure to the West, ultimately to see the U.S. leave the region, see other Western countries leave the region so that Iran can move in and have more of a hegemony in the Middle East. And they say, look, if you look at the evidence, at the ships that are being targeted, at the way that the Houthis are carrying out the strikes, there is no connection. There is no evidence pointing to anything that links to Israel, and that what the Houthis are doing is simply reckless, endangering shipping, endangering lives, And it's also, they say, very much illegal. They're attacking ships that are in shipping lanes in international waters, and that there's no justification, and that, in fact, the strikes that the U.S. and Britain carried out late Thursday are self-defense strikes to protect the interests of all those nations that are reliant upon shipping in these shipping lanes in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden.
All right, Jeff, thanks again for your time.
Anytime.
Let's move on to other stories. South Africa's legal team has argued that Israel's conduct is in contravention of parts of the Genocide Convention. The team submitted its argument in the International Court of Justice in The Hague, Netherlands. The convention defines genocide as an act committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. The court is hearing the matter between South Africa and Israel. South Africa is seeking provisional measures from the court for Israel to halt the bombardment in Gaza. Our South Africa correspondent, Innocent Simosa, reports.
South Africa has contended before the International Court of Justice that Israel has violated the Genocide Convention of 1948. Pretoria has dragged Israel to the World Court as the conflict worsens in Gaza, and it wants Israel to halt its military operation.
At the outset, South Africa acknowledges that the genocidal acts and omissions by the State of Israel inevitably form part of a continuum of illegal acts perpetrated against the Palestinian people since 1948. The application places Israel's genocidal acts and omissions within the broader context of Israel's 75-year apartheid, 56-year occupation, and 16-year siege imposed on the Gaza Strip, a siege which itself has been described by the director of UNRWA affairs in Gaza as a silent killer of people.
South Africa's Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, gave a historical trajectory of the conflict.
The Palestinians have experienced systematic oppression and violence for the last 76 years. On 6 October 2023 and every day since October the 7th, 2023. In the Gaza Strip, at least since 2004, Israel continues to exercise control over the airspace, territorial waters, land crossing, water, electricity, and civilian infrastructure.
Meanwhile, Israel has vehemently denied the allegations. The amount of support at home has been tremendous for the legal team.
Look, whether South African government loses, it's not a case that we should be disappointed, but it's a historic day. We are quite proud to be South African. We remember the words of Madiba that our freedom cannot be fully celebrated if the people of Palestine cannot enjoy their freedom as well.
We stand resolute behind the South African legal team as they continue their presentations and arguments for the urgent application filed with the International Court of Justice against Israel for acts of genocide in Gaza. Recognizing the profound impact on the oppressed, the ATM condemns the egregious violations of human rights and underscores the critical need for global solidarity to address these ongoing atrocities.
South Africa has ordered the State of Israel to immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Simosa, Channels Television News.
And on the humanitarian scale, South Africa says Israel's action in Gaza meant Palestinians would receive either a slow death from starvation or would die quickly as it continues its genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. South Africa noted that Israeli Defense Forces had subjected Gaza to what has been described as one of the heaviest conventional bombing campaigns in the history of modern warfare.
Madam President, Israel has a genocidal intent against the Palestinians in Gaza. That is evident from the way in which Israel's military attack is being conducted, which has been described by Ms. Hassim SC. It is a genocide. 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 It is a It is systematic in its character and form. The mass displacement of the population of Gaza, headed into areas where they continue to be killed, and the deliberate creation of conditions that, quote, lead to a slow death, unquote. There is also the clear pattern of conduct, the targeting of family homes and civilian infrastructure, laying waste to vast areas of Gaza, and the bombing, shelling, and sniping of men, women, and children where they stand, the destruction of the health infrastructure, and lack of access to humanitarian assistance. That Israel's political leaders, military commanders, and persons holding official positions have systematically and in explicit terms declared their genocidal intent. And these statements are then repeated by soldiers on the ground in Gaza as they engage in the destruction of Palestinians and the physical infrastructure of Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his address to the Israeli forces on 28 October 2023, preparing for the invasion of Gaza, urged the soldiers to remember what Amalek has done to you. This refers to the biblical command by God to Saul for the retaliatory destruction of an entire group of people. The Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, Israel Katz, called for the denial of water and fuel, as this is what will happen to a people of children killers and slaughterers. This admits of no ambiguity. It means to create conditions of death of the Palestinian people in Gaza. To die a slow death because of starvation and dehydration, or to die quickly because of a bomb attack or snipers, but to die nevertheless.
More reactions now, this time from South Africa's legal representative, Adila Hassim, who says Israel's military campaign in Gaza is nothing short of destruction of Palestinian life. Ms. Hassim says Palestinians in Gaza are subjected to relentless bombing, adding that no one is spared, not even newborn babies.
Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated places in the world, is home to approximately 2.3 million Palestinians, almost half of them children. For the past 96 days, Israel has subjected Gaza to what has been described as one of the heaviest conventional bombing campaigns in the history of modern warfare. Palestinians in Gaza are being killed by Israeli weaponry and bombs from air, land, and sea. They are also at immediate risk of death by starvation, dehydration, and disease as a result of the ongoing siege by Israel, the destruction of Palestinian towns, the insufficient aid being allowed through to the Palestinian population, and the impossibility of distributing this limited aid while bombs fall. This conduct renders essentials to life unobtainable. It is not necessary for the court to come to a final view on the question of whether Israel's conduct constitutes genocide. It is necessary to establish only whether at least some of the acts alleged are capable of falling within the provisions of the Convention. On analyzing the specific and ongoing genocidal acts complained of, it is clear that at least some, if not all of these acts, fall within the Convention's provisions. These acts are documented in detail in South Africa's application and confirmed by reliable, often UN sources. It's thus unnecessary and impossible for me to recount all of them.
Victory to South African legal team! Victory! Victory to South African legal team! Free, free Palestine!
In the meantime, crowds of pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered outside the High Supreme Court in Cape Town to voice their support for South Africa's genocide case against Israel in The Hague. Footage shows protesters waving Palestinian flags and holding placards bearing slogans such as "Boycott Apartheid Israel" and "Stop the Genocide."
Gathering here today as progressive organizations within the legal fraternity to be able to show support to our government as well as the legal team in The Hague today.
Stop the deliberate infliction of conditions leading and physical destructions. For example, bombing hospitals, bombing churches, bombing schools. End the expulsion and forcible displacement of Palestinians from their homes and ensure access to adequate food, adequate water, humanitarian assistance and medical supplies. Prevent the destruction of evidence related to genocidal allegations.
Why did we all have to wait until thousands and tens of thousands of children, men, women, the elderly, people living with disabilities were dying? Murdered, executed, assassinated.
And what has Israel got to say about this? Well, its legal representative, Tal Becker, accused South Africa of maintaining close relations with Hamas despite its formal recognition as a terrorist organization. In October, the South African presidency denied having bilateral relations with Hamas, saying that it has bilateral relations with the Palestinian Authority, and that support for the Palestinian struggle against occupation does not equate to support for Hamas. Mr. Becker claimed that South Africa's case hinges on a deliberately curated and manipulative description of the reality of current hostilities.
For some, the promise of never again for all peoples is a slogan. For Israel, it is the highest moral obligation of the interest of humanity. The entirety of its case hinges on a deliberately curated, decontextualized, and manipulative description of the reality of current hostilities. Legitimizing Israel's 75-year existence, the attempt to weaponize the term genocide against Israel in the present context does more than tell the court a grossly distorted story. And it does more than empty the word of its unique force and special meaning. It subverts the object and purpose of the convention itself, with ramifications for all states seeking to defend themselves against those who demonstrate total disdain for life and for the law, and any Palestinian agency or responsibility. That if there have been acts that may be characterized as genocidal, then they have been perpetrated against Israel. If there is a concern about the obligations of states under the Genocide Convention, then it is in relation to their responsibilities to act against Hamas's proudly declared agenda of annihilation, which is not a secret and is not in doubt. The annihilationist language of Hamas's charter is repeated regularly by its leaders, with the goal, in the words of one member of Hamas's political bureau, of the cleansing of Palestine of the filth of the Jews. In its opening presentation yesterday, that it is a matter of public record that South Africa enjoys close relations with Hamas, despite its formal recognition as a terrorist organization by numerous states across the world.
Welcome back. Turkey has welcomed 85 Palestinian patients and injured people, as well as 106 companions evacuated from Gaza. The wounded were transferred by ambulances from the airport in Ankara to various hospitals in the Turkish capital. Turkey has received 369 injured Palestinians from Gaza for treatment since the start of the war between Israel and Hamas on October 7th. Fighting continues in Gaza as the war enters its fourth month. Well, how well do you love your pets? A courageous young Palestinian woman known as Israel Fares managed to smuggle her cherished parrot, Koki, across an Israeli checkpoint while fleeing from the war-torn region of northern Gaza to a shelter school in Rafah. The Palestinian woman, who has been displaced due to the ongoing conflict, can be seen introducing Koki to children in the schoolyard. Israel, originally from Al-Karama, a neighborhood in northern Gaza, was compelled to leave when the war broke out. She brought Koki and 4 other parrots, as well as her fish, initially relocating to Tal Al-Hawa neighborhood in Gaza City. She was forced to leave behind her 4 other parrots who died from starvation. The fish also passed away, leaving Koki as her sole survivor. Well, now to the other war, to the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says Britain will provide £2.5 billion of military aid to Ukraine over the coming year, making it Britain's largest annual commitment since Russia's invasion. Mr. Sunak made the announcement during a rare visit to Ukraine, where he will also sign a new agreement supporting its long-term security. Officials said the package will provide Ukraine with long-range missiles, air defense and artillery shells. Some £200 million will be spent on drones, most of which will be made in the UK. According to authorities, the military package for the next financial year, beginning in April, will result in the largest delivery of drones to Ukraine by any country. Some ministers and senior military figures had argued privately this would send a stronger signal to Moscow of Britain's long-term support. To other stories, Peruvian police officers are guarding the border crossing with Ecuador after the Lima government declared a state of emergency on the region. Peru also announced an immediate deployment of forces following days of violence in Ecuador, a move residents have welcomed. Ecuadorian police can also be seen guarding streets on the other side of the border, which spans 1,500 kilometers. Some feared that the ongoing uncertainty at the border could hit the economy. Peruvian Interior Minister Victor Torres said that the government did not plan to close the border. It comes amid an escalation of violence in Ecuador, which the government there blamed on transnational organized crime, terrorist organizations, and belligerent non-state actors. Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa introduced a state of emergency in his country, adding that those responsible will be neutralized. Well, a quick check on the weather, where severe flooding hit the Corrientes province in Argentina, causing widespread damage. Footage captures flooded streets, overflowing rivers, and locals using boats for transportation. Authorities have issued yellow and orange alerts, while at least 800 people were evacuated from Corrientes province and 128 from Santa Lucia. The National Meteorological Service predicted further heavy rains in the affected areas. And over in Afghanistan, where the United Nations mission in the country is expressing deep concern over the oppressive detention of women and young girls to the de facto authorities. The spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General Stefan Dujarric says that the mission has called for the immediate release of the detainees and investigation into the situation is ongoing.
Afghanistan, the UN mission in Afghanistan expressed today its deep concern over the recent arbitrary arrests and detention of women and girls by the de facto authorities because of their alleged non-compliance with the hijab decree. The UN mission said it's looking to allegations of incommunicado detention and ill treatment and is discussing these issues with the de facto authorities themselves. The mission also called for the immediate release of all those who were detained. If you recall, in May of last year, the Secretary General expressed his alarm when the Taliban announced that women must cover their faces in public and leave home only in cases of necessity. And we will keep echoing those concerns and engaging with the authorities on those.
Now, farmer and train workers are staging strikes for better pay and better health conditions in Germany. Farmers in the country are blockading roads in protest against subsidy cuts, with more than 500 tractors and trucks parked up by Berlin's Brandenburg Gate. The subsidy cuts were put in place to fix a budget crisis after a court ruled the government's 2024 budget was illegal. Europe is facing a backlash from workers over these policies and measures by the German government. Let's get more on this. Deutsche Welle's Warder Imran joins us from Berlin. Great to see you. All these strikes mean that the labor market in Germany is distressed. Tell us more about their concerns.
Happy to be here. Well, it's a long list, like you mentioned. Some of these strikes are for better pay, better working conditions. And if we begin with the train strikers, for example, they want to reduce their working hours from 38 hours to 35 hours a week. Now, the train company, Deutsche Bahn, which is owned by the state, is saying you can have these reduced hours, but only at reduced pay. They won't retain the existing pay. And union reps are saying that this is not okay, and there may be a lot more strikes planned in the future because workers are unhappy. And if we turn to the farmers' protest, for example, that's a bit more complicated. The government had been providing agriculture sector with subsidies, incentives, direct aid, and I think about a third of the EU's entire budget is dedicated to agriculture subsidies. In Germany, the particular protest is about fuel subsidies and about regulation like the phasing out of pesticides. Some of these proposed measures are in line with the climate targets that countries here have set for themselves. And the EU wants to be net zero by 2030. That's only 6 more years.
And it seems that the trend, is in similar countries like France and Spain. What will be the potential outcome of these protests?
Yes, Spanish farmers are also angry. They're unhappy about water-saving measures, which will make it hard to irrigate the land. And again, these policies are in line with the climate goals set. The French farmers, on the other hand, despite having massive incentives and aid in the past, are now saying that fuel expenses are very high and that EU trade policies make their work much harder. And it seems farmers all over Europe are having to bear the brunt of expensive fertilizer and fuel. They say that they can barely make ends meet with what they earn. And as far as potential outcome, well, I think there will have to be a lot of compromise on both ends. Olaf Scholz's government did make some concessions, like proposing that the subsidies cut take place not immediately, but over the next few years. Climate-friendly policies are in place because the EU and Germany are falling a little behind on their action plan. But agriculture, which contributes to 1.4% of the EU's GDP, is very, very valued here.
Right, and inflation in Germany persists. What impact will these protests have on prices eventually?
Well, I can already see price hikes not too far in the future. Inflation in Germany is still higher than we'd like it to be. And with existing problems like very high rental costs, high cost of buying apartments, coupled with high energy costs that still persist, and now these perhaps rising prices, this has led to some frustration in people here. And that's why there's kind of a general fear that these strikes may become politicized. But a lot of people do stand behind the farmers, kind of against the government. So there will have to be a middle ground. This will be tough for Germany because of their spending and debt issues, and because hundreds and thousands of people are tied to this sector here. Over the last decade or so, many small or mid-sized farms had to be shut down because it was too expensive to keep them afloat. For pay, I say that across Europe there is discontent, even though there have been sharp rises to minimum wage recently. That looks good on paper, but that doesn't always translate to more purchasing power.
Right, the DW's Water Imran, thank you for your time. Let's move on. A military tribunal in the Democratic Republic of Congo has sentenced 15 people to prison after finding them guilty of financing terrorism through illegal gold trade. The tribunal jailed 10 suspects for terms ranging between 5 and 8 years and handed 5 others 10-year terms. The court also acquitted 9 defendants. The defendants stood accused of facilitating the transfer of money obtained from the illicit sale of gold and precious stones to militant groups. Leaders of the East African Regional Bloc, IGAD, will next week meet in Uganda to discuss the growing diplomatic tensions between Ethiopia and Somalia. Djibouti's President Ismail Omar Guelleh, who is the current chair of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, made the announcement through a letter to the bloc's member states. The African Union and other international partners are also expected to partake in the talks, which will also touch on ongoing conflict in Sudan. And here in Nigeria, its foreign policy, it has been hard to decipher over the last few years, but experts say Nigeria is clear that foreign policy is driven by domestic policy. What should be Nigeria's foreign policy in 2024? Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Amarachi Ubani, takes a look at this.
Shuttle diplomacy characterized the mood of Nigeria's foreign policy in 2023. But it was not shuttle diplomacy without direction. It was all aimed at boosting the domestic economy and perhaps help Nigeria regain her once enviable position as giant of Africa. The new president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, wasted no time in posturing Nigeria as Africa's big brother when he announced his stand on the Niger coup at the extraordinary session of the Economic Community of West African States in the month of July in Abuja.
I want us to be strong, forceful, and resolute about survival of Basum.
ECOWAS announced an ultimatum to the junta to restore civilian rule, else the regional body will employ all means necessary to achieve this, including the use of force. Unfortunately, this was interpreted by the new junta and other junta in the region as Nigeria's position as well. The debate is still ongoing whether or not ECOWAS has succeeded in its objective, or if Nigeria is much feared among her neighbors, as the junta remains in political power.
The change is right here.
While in Saudi Arabia for the first Saudi-Africa summit, President Tinubu acknowledged the country's dwindling reputation, but assured that things were changing for the better.
Perception of Nigeria has been that of layback, corruption, and giant of Africa with elephantiasis. But that is gone.
And while he was in the US for the UN General Assembly, he was given the rare honor of ringing the closing bell of the New York Stock Exchange. His meetings in the UAE opened up discussions on the visa ban with a promise to have the service restored, and the Nigeria-Saudi Business Council was established. He presided over the signing of the Presidential Power Initiative Agreement between Nigeria and Germany to add 12,000 megawatts of electricity to the national grid. Analysts, however, emphasize fixing the domestic policy is key to the success of any international achievements.
We should pay more attention to our domestic emancipation, industrial development, because nobody listens, even at international level, to poor people. Look, when China became strong, so everybody started listening to China.
This brings us back to the age-long question: what is Nigeria's foreign policy? Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News.
Welcome back. The war in Sudan seems not to be abating as the army and the rival paramilitary rapid support forces have intensified fighting in the capital, Khartoum. At least 10 civilians have been killed after the rival factions exchanged artillery fire in the southern region. Local media reports that some victims died when an artillery shell hit a house where a social event was taking place. Fierce confrontations were also reported in residential areas and a local market. The 9-month crisis has seen many civilians killed in indiscriminate shelling across the country. Clashes have also intensified in the cities of Omdurman and Bari, and with the army claiming advances. According to UN figures, the conflict has killed at least 12,000 people and displaced more than 7 million others. Well, Burundi has closed its borders with Rwanda after accusing its neighbor of funding rebel attacks. Last December, Red Tabara, a Burundian rebel group, killed 20 people near the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Burundian President Evariste Ndayishimiye made the accusation in December following the attack. Rwandan President Paul Kagame denies the charge, but Burundi's government has branded him a bad neighbor, with the Interior Minister saying Burundi has stopped ties with him until he changes. In response, the Rwandan government says it regrets the border closure, calling it an unfortunate decision which violated the principles of regional cooperation and the integration of the East Africa community. Relations between Rwanda and Burundi have been tenuous despite their having a similar language, ethnic composition, and colonial history. The situation in the West African region has been marked by contrasting developments, including significant progress in consolidating democracy. This is according to the head of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, Leonardo Santos Samao, who says over the past 6 months in some parts of the region, the security situation and governance challenges remain a major concern. He was briefing the Security Council in New York.
Forces, and we move into a post-MINUSMA Mali, we need to take stock of that decade-long experience and draw lessons required to inform a fast-approaching future. As a legacy of MINUSMA, the UN will continue to maintain a key role in support of the Malian people, but remain committed to deliver. All the while, the closure of MINUSMA, the departure of the foreign forces, and the uncertainty about the G5 Sahel following the withdrawal of Burkina Faso and Niger portend a reconfiguration of a regional security coordination mechanism. Conversely, coordinated operations under the multinational joint task force have contributed to some tenuous stabilization in the Lake Chad region. As the number of children out of school remains disturbingly high, with thousands of schools closed due to insecurity, compounding the deficit of education systems already thinly stretched before. In November 2023, UNOWAS held a colloquium on the nexus between security, access to education, and governance in the Central Sahel and West Africa.
The new digital visa-free system for all foreigners introduced in Kenya on January 1 continues to spark controversy in the country. Locals and tourists are voicing mixed opinions about the measure in Nairobi. According to the new policy, to visit the country, travelers can obtain an electronic travel authorization by submitting required documentation online and paying a processing fee at least 72 hours before travel.
People just having free access to our country, it will have brought so much problems. But then again, at the same time, they should have been able to just tell people the truth, that there will be a fee that they're supposed to pay, instead of like putting people in a situation where they have to come and then have to wait, and they were not told before. So that's the con about it. But I feel like it is a bigger pro than a con.
I think all this was very, very easy. I took my visa online. It was very fast. Yeah, I think it's a very good thing, very positive for the tourism in Kenya.
People coming in a country, visa charges. That's not the only way the government gets money. Okay, actually, that is it is less. Because, let me tell you, a hotel in Masai Mara charges like how much for 1 week? And how much money does a government charge that hotel? Okay? So the more people, the more the hotels and Masai Mara occupied.
I think it's good, this new thing about the visa, because it's more easy. And for the people can travel here, knowing Kenya, because I think it's open country and good country for the visit. I think we'll stay good here.
The IMF says it sees the global economy headed for a soft landing scenario, but warns that leaders should be preparing for future shocks and challenges. Spokesperson Julie Kozak said that Egyptian officials met with executives at the IMF this week to discuss economic reforms amidst the ongoing conflict between Israel and Gaza. Ms. Kozak said that the fund's executive board has also completed a third review of Mozambique's 3-year loan program, allowing for an immediate disbursement to Maputo of about $60.7 million. The fund is expected to update its global growth forecast on January 30th in the World Economic Outlook report set to be unveiled in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Risking China relying supply chains.
Our team is in discussions with the authorities on a set of policies that would support completion of the first and second reviews of the EFF that Egypt has with the fund. This strong engagement that we've had with the authorities has helped achieve important progress in the discussions, and we do expect those discussions to continue in the coming weeks to operationalize the key policy priorities. On Mozambique, what I can say is that the executive board completed the third review under the ECF arrangement just a few days ago. Program performance was satisfactory. So the program is on track in Mozambique. The authorities have put in place immediate policy adjustments following some fiscal slippages earlier on. Continued efforts on the fiscal side are warranted to reduce Mozambique's financing needs and to contain its debt vulnerabilities.
And finally on the program, the world's largest cruise ship, Icon of the Seas, has arrived at Port Miami, United States. Footage shows the 1,198-foot-long vessel with space for up to 5,610 passengers and 2,350 crew pulling into the dock as dozens of fans, executives and staff greeted its arrival. The Royal Caribbean ship, which reportedly took 900 days to build and weighs around 254,800 tons, began its journey from Europe last month. According to officials, cruises will begin on January 27, with 2 more similar ships scheduled for delivery over the next few years.
There's over 40 restaurants, tons of neighborhoods. It's like an all-inclusive resort, but you never need to leave. It's just incredible that they're able to put all of this onto a cruise ship. Oh my, it's the world's largest cruise ship. I mean, it's like, go to Las Vegas, see any of those giant resorts. I mean, we made that happen on the sea.
The ship, it's so much more than a cruise ship. It is pretty much the combination of every amazing family vacation you've ever had. It's got 8 distinct neighborhoods on board, so no matter what mood you're in or what you're looking to do, there's plenty to do on board, from age 6 months to 106.
Icono Seas is what we call the most iconic ship in our class. It's brand new. To me, it's amazing. We've been working on this project for several years, and we finally get to see it in fruition. I'm in shock. I'm amazed of the way it's massive. I'm in awe right now.
Well, fancy a cruise on that. That's our program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joker Rogers. We'll be back next week.